Dave Clarke, who's the deputy White House editor at the Washington Post, very well placed to follow these big headlines coming out of Washington today. So first off, let's start with, if I can, the latest news from the Supreme Court and Anthony Kennedy leaving. What's that going to mean for your country?
Well, this is a huge deal. While you've mentioned Justice Kennedy is expected, he may retire sometime soon. This still caught people off guard. He's been a very important justice in probably over the past decade. He's been a swing vote, so he's sided with the liberals on numerous cases and the conservatives. And so a lot of the decisions have really come down to him. You talked about gay marriage, where he sided with the liberals on the court. Recently, this week, we saw him side with the conservatives on the travel ban. So he's really been the vote, the justice to watch, and now he's going to be gone. And so the presumption is that President Trump is going to nominate someone from a list of conservative justices. He'll probably make that announcement sometime in the next couple of weeks, and that could really change the whole dynamic on the court. There would now be 5 very solid conservative votes, and that has would have a huge impact on social issues, national security issues. So it's really something coming out of Washington that's going to have a lot of impact and be a big deal.
How big of a win is this for the Republicans in that case, Dave?
From their perspective, it's a huge win. I think you remember before the election, there was a big fight in Congress over whether or not the Republicans should hold a hearing, a nomination hearing on President Obama's nominee to replace Justice Scalia, Merrick Garland. The Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said, we're not going to do that. We're going to let the voters decide. And that was a huge swing. What happened then was Neil Gorsuch, a very conservative justice, got the nomination, so he's there. And now with Justice Kennedy leaving, this gives President Trump a real opportunity to shape the Supreme Court for a long time. He's likely to nominate someone who's relatively young with regard to Supreme Court justices. The 4 justices, conservative justices there now, are also fairly young, so they'll be on the court for possibly decades to come.
I'm also curious, you talked about these social issues, whether it's about gay rights or reproductive rights. I mean, to a large extent, those were settled by Supreme Courts previously, but might that change? I mean, could we see those debates reopen? We certainly know there's a lot of division socially within the United States over those issues, but legally speaking.
Sure, those issues can come back to the court. I think one of the big concerns among Democrats now and progressive groups is whether or not the court will find a way to revisit Roe v. Wade or in some way revisit abortion policies. So that's something that I think you'll hear a lot about before the midterm elections, as both parties will be trying to ramp up the enthusiasm in their voting bases. And I think you're going to hear a lot about abortion. So that is something in the future the court could revisit. That's obviously been an issue for a long time, but Roe v. Wade has been around since, I believe, 1973, but it's always been a goal of the pro-life movement and conservatives to revisit it at some point. And who knows, in the next few years, they may have their chance.
All right, let's go from that big legal story to, of course, the immigration crisis, which has been generating headlines around the world in light of these child separations. And again, we saw a defeat today, not a big surprise, but nevertheless a defeat for this bill in the House of Representatives. The Republicans were not able to stay unified on this. And what does that mean, sort of bigger picture?
Well, I think it means is there's just such division in the U.S. right now over immigration, and the result has been sort of a mess of a system. In our current context, we have the executive order that President Trump put out that said it would allow families to be kept together if they're detained, migrant families. This, of course, followed the uproar over his administration's decision to separate families. But the administration is having a very difficult time deciding how to implement that. We've seen divisions between the Homeland Security Department and the Justice Department. Now, last night, a judge in California ruled that, the administration has, I believe, 30 days to reunite the families that have been separated, but it doesn't seem that there's really a plan to do that. So it's really been a mess. And if you look in Congress, the question is, what can they pass? The House, say, defeated another broader immigration bill as expected. And so the question now is going to turn to, will Congress pass a very direct bill that would deal only with the separation of families, basically saying that a current court ruling that says you can't keep children detained for more than 20 days, whether basically we'll get rid of that and just say you can detain families together for an indefinite period of time, or at least until their immigration case is heard. And there is a possibility Congress will do that because this has become a real political problem for the Republicans. But beyond that, there's no chance of any big sweeping immigration law happening this year, and it's not clear it will really happen in the near future next year either.
Dave, great to have you with us here on CTV News in Canada, and thank you for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
Dave Clarke, Deputy White House Editor at The Washington Post.